The President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces and Ministerial of National Defense, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired at the Shashal Houari Boumediene Military Academy the annual graduation ceremony of 2022-2023 promotions. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has been received in Tehran by the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi as part of his visit to the country. The United Nations has warned that Sudan was on the verge of a total civil war that is potentially destabilizing for the whole region after scores of civilians were killed in airstrikes on a residential area in Khartoum. Hello and welcome to this news bulletin broadcast to you live from Radio Algeria International. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, had a telephone conversation with the President of the friendly Portuguese Republic, Mr. Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, during which he inquired about his state of health following an illness. For his part, the Portuguese President expressed his thanks to the President of the Republic for this kind gesture.
And the President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired at the Shashal Houari Boumediene Military Academy the annual graduation ceremony for 2022-2023 promotions. Upon his arrival, the President of the Republic was welcomed at the Academy by the Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, General Saeed Shingriha, accompanied by senior officers of the People's National Army. He later on reviewed a military detachment which honored him at the entrance of the Academy before listening to the national anthem. In his speech, General Saeed Shingriha spoke of the many achievements Algeria has made.
Algeria witnessed this year significant achievements and successes at the diplomatic level as it managed, thanks to your wise policies, to strengthen cooperation relations with many broadly and friendly countries and stressed the centrality of its role at the international scene and its contribution to achieving international peace and security.
Earlier in the day, Army General Saeed Shingriha arrived to the Military Academy of Shashal as part of an official visit that comes on the eve of the annual graduation ceremony of the 2022-2023 promotions. After the welcoming ceremony, Mr. Shingriha delivered an orientation speech through which he underlined that the Academy constitutes a mirror which reflects the major steps taken by the People's National Army in the strengthening of its military capabilities. He added that the highest command of the People's National Army continues in line with the guidelines and instructions of the President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense to deploy all the necessary efforts in order to provide more efficiency and professionalism not only to our training apparatus but also to all the components of our armed forces, the objective being to achieve optimal availability worthy of a professional and imposing army which has as a motto the defense of the people and the homeland and as a legitimate ambitions to occupy the first ranks in terms of regional superiority. At the end of the sidelines of this visit, the Army General inaugurated some infrastructure offering many services which will certainly contribute to bringing together all the appropriate conditions for the students of the Academy.
And the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has been received in Tehran by Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi as part of his working visit to the country. The minister also met with his Iranian counterpart, in which they reviewed Algerian-Iranian relations and discussed several important files. Let's take a listen.
The working session I had with the Excellency the Minister was a precious opportunity to discuss the situation of bilateral relations and their future prospects in the light of the orientation of the leaders of the two sister countries. We have also seized the opportunity to discuss and to coordinate about the latest developments and rapid changes taking place in our regions and on the international plan, notably during such a troubled moment of the international relations system.
Now, the Communication Department at the Presidency of the Republic has recalled in a press release the rules for releasing or publishing information relating to presidential activity. The press release indicated that the Communication Department at the Presidency of the Republic recalled the content of its previous press release, stating that official information comes exclusively from press releases disseminated by the Presidency of the Republic via its Communication Department. After noting laxity in its implementation through the publication and dissemination of information allegedly related to official activities, the Communication Department calls once again for strict compliance with the laws of the Republic and the profession's ethics, and warns that any recourse to other sources with regard to presidential activity is propaganda and false information, which engages the responsibility of the author, who will be held accountable. And the Algerian Red Crescent has held its ordinary general meeting here in Algiers in the presence of representatives of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies for the Middle East and North Africa region. On the occasion, the president of the Algerian Red Crescent, Ibtissam Hamlawi, affirmed that the meeting was an opportunity to carry out the restructuring of this humanitarian organization and the revision of its statutes to comply with national legislation and changes occurring in the world. Mrs. Hamlawi evoked in this respect the action program of the Algerian Red Crescent for the years to come, which is based, she said, on the implementation of an ambitious plan aimed at professionalizing humanitarian action and rescue. It should be noted that on the sidelines of the proceedings of this meeting, a partnership agreement was signed between the Algerian Red Crescent and the National Foundation for the Promotion of Health and the Development of Research, FORAM. The president of FORAM, Mustafa Khiyati, indicated on the occasion that this agreement was the first building block for cooperation in the field of humanitarian action.
And as you followed in the headlines, the United Nations has warned that Sudan was on the verge of a total civil war that is potentially destabilizing for the whole region after scores of civilians were killed in air raids on a residential area of Khartoum. The United Nations Secretary General urged the government and the rapid support paramilitary forces to stop the fighting, urging them to respect their obligations and to ensure the protection of the population. He expressed consternation at reports on the large-scale violence and number of victims in Darfur, in Sudan's western part, and reiterated that the UN would continue to back the international efforts made as part of the African Union to end the conflict. And according to the Health Ministry, 22 civilians were killed and scores of others wounded in the airstrikes targeting a district in Omdurman in the northwestern suburb of the capital.
And the Palestinian Foreign Ministry has reiterated that the protection provided by some countries to the Israeli occupying government and its non-accountability are encouraging the occupying authorities to carry on more crimes and violations. It condemned the attacks methodically perpetrated by the Israeli soldiers and by the Jewish settlers against Palestinian civilians, their lands and properties, as well as their sacred places. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry denounced the pursuit of such acts of aggression amid incitements to hatred waged by the Israeli occupying authorities to justify their decision to arm the Jewish settlers. In this connection, the EU representative to Palestine, Seven Kuhn von Bergenstoff, denounced Israel's attack on Jenin and called into question what he termed the proportionality of Israel's use of force during the operation. During a visit of the UN delegation bringing together diplomats representing 25 countries to Jenin, he deplored the deployment of arms and the various systems of weapons that question the proportionality of the Israeli army or use of force. It is worth recalling that the UN chief has denounced Israel's excessive use of force during its army operation in Jenin. This came as 4 Palestinians were today arrested during an operation carried out by the Israeli forces in Hebron in the West Bank. Local sources were quoted by the news agency Wafa as saying that several parts of the town were assaulted by the Israeli army, which has intensified its operations in the West Bank over the past few days, including occupied Jerusalem. In this respect, 4 Palestinians were wounded, including one seriously, in incidents that erupted after the Israeli occupying forces stormed a municipality east of Qalqiliyah.
And to U.S. and China, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said that her visit to Beijing has marked a step forward in efforts to stabilize relations between the two countries. Yellen's comments were delivered at a press conference and in a 4-day visit to Beijing that she described as a mission to revive engagement between the two largest economies. Frictions between Washington and Beijing have tumbled into a tit-for-tat trade war that has seen both sides restrict exports critical to advanced technologies. She described the talks as direct, substantive, and productive, and she said both sides had learned more about each other. However, she admitted the U.S. and China still had significant disagreements. The U.S. Treasury chief emphasized the benefits of trade with China and said she'd stressed to skeptical officials in Beijing that diversifying supply chains in narrow areas wasn't the same as decoupling. This is something I'm trying to communicate, and I believe very strongly myself, she said. I think that message was received. While in China, Yellen held 10 hours of talks that she described as direct, substantive, and productive, and said had brought U.S. and China closer ties closer to a surer footing. Half of that time was spent with her counterpart, Vice Premier He Lifan, the first extensive exchange between the two policy chiefs since China's new economic team was appointed. And during a shorter meeting with Premier Li Qian, she had a broader exchange on the U.S.-China relationship.
And now the head of state and government of the Economic Community of West African State, ECOWAS, are meeting today in Guinea-Bissau to examine the transition in Mali, Burkina Faso and Guinea. The transition process in the three countries held pride of place in the 63rd session of the ECOWAS, notably the commitments taken by the authorities of the three countries to organize elections in order to pave the way for a return to the constitutional order. The representative of the ECOWAS are also due to take the security issue considered tackle security issue considered a priority and a challenge for the Burkina Faso authorities ahead of the election.
And with this last piece of information, the general rehearsal of the play La Fatman Soumer, a tragic epic dedicated to this great figure of popular resistance against the French occupiers, presented on Saturday evening in Algiers in the presence of the Minister of Culture and Arts, Soraya Mouloudji, presented in Tamazirt and at the Mehiden National Theatre as part of the Heritage Month organized in celebration of the 60th anniversary of Algeria's independence. The show attracted a relatively large audience, and the Minister of Culture and Arts hailed the accomplished and highly professional work that was done.
And before wrapping up this news bulletin for today, a word of sports. 9 new medals, including 4 gold, 2 silver and 3 bronze, have added up to the Algerian harvest at the end of the 5th day of the competition in the 15th edition of the Arab Sports Games, now taking place in our country. The gold medals were won by swimmers Jawad Sayoud and in the 50-meter butterfly, Amal Millih in the 50-meter backstroke, Rania Nafsi in the 200-meter medley, and the 4 times 200 relay team. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for weekly programs, starting with my colleague Jamal Silmani, and it will be followed by another program by my colleague Aziz Agassi. As for us, we'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Alger International, and bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye for now.
The Kasbah is a unique kind of Medina or Islamic city. It stands in one of the finest coastal sites on the Mediterranean, overlooking the islands, where a Carthaginian trading post was established in the 4th century before Christ. There are the remains of the citadel, old mosques and Ottoman-style palaces, as well as the remains of a traditional urban structure associated with a deep-rooted sense of community. The Kasbah of Algiers is an outstanding example of a historic Maghreb city having had extensive influence on town planning in the western part of the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa. Indeed, located on the Mediterranean coast, the site was inhabited at least from the 6th century BC, when a Phoenician trading post was established in there. The term Kasbah, that originally designated the highest point of the Medina during the Zirid area, today applies to the ensemble of the old town of El Jazair, within the boundaries marked by the ramparts and built at the end of the 16th century, dating back to the Ottoman period. In this living environment where nearly 50,000 people reside, very interesting traditional houses, palaces, hammams, mosques and various souks are still conserved, the urban form of which bears witness of an effect of stratification of several styles in a complex and original system that has adapted remarkably well to a very hilly and uneven site. The Casbah of Algiers has exercised considerable influence on architecture and town planning in North Africa, Andalusia, and in sub-Saharan Africa during the 16th and 17th century. These exchanges are illustrated in the specific character of its houses and the density of its urban stratification, a model of human settlement where the ancestral lifestyle and Muslim customs have blended with other types of traditions. The Casbah of Algiers is an outstanding example of a traditional human settlement representing a profoundly Mediterranean Muslim culture, synthesis of numerous traditions, the vestige of the citadel, ancient mosques, Ottoman palaces, as well as the traditional urban structure associated with a strong sense of community testify to this culture and are the result of its interaction with the various layers of populations. Despite the changes and the earthquake risks experienced by the site, the Casbah of Algiers still retains its integrity. On the whole, the aesthetic character, material used, and the architectural elements retain their original aspect that expresses the values for which the site was inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1992. The continuing residential function has strengthened the viability of the site as well as the integrity of its image. Restoration work of the built heritage of the Casbah undertaken in the framework of the Safeguarding and Valorization Plan is in conformity with the local and national standards and contributes towards maintaining the integrity of the site. Nevertheless, there are threats to the integrity linked to densification and uncontrolled interventions. Other risks originate from earthquakes and fire, as well as landslides and floods. The attributes of the outstanding universal value for which the site was inscribed are maintained. The Casbah bears witness to a remarkable authenticity as regards the form and conception with its very dense urban planning. Construction materials with earthen bricks, earthen and lime rendering, stone and wood, and also the use, whether residential for trading or cult and popular customs. The survival of traditional architectural skills, notably in the building trades and architectural decoration, is a major advantage in support of the outstanding universal value. The Casbah of Algiers was listed as a National Historic Site in November 1991 and safeguarded sector in 2003. The State Party considers, however, that it is necessary to revise the legal and administrative provisions relating to the property to improve its protection and enhancement. The management of the site is entrusted to the Cultural Directorate of the Wilaya or Province of Algiers. There is a continual need to conserve and rehabilitate the property to forestall deterioration of the urban fabric. Threats from the risks of earthquakes and the fire exist, whereas the landslides and floods always constitute a possible threat. A permanent plan for the safeguarding and the valorization of the safeguarded. The management plan will cover these issues and take account of a buffer zone and regular monitoring activities. To reinforce this action, a regulatory text is being adopted, that of the agencies for the safeguarded sectors. The Office for the Management of Cultural Properties and Exploitation is responsible in the name of the Ministry of Culture for the management of the listed archaeological and historic monuments and sites, including those located inside a safeguarded sector.